Brilliant. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight at I think this is our second meet-up of the year, following the Tech Predictions one we did in January, which some of you might have joined us at. My name is Heather Thompson. I'm the CEO of the Data Lab. And just want to welcome you here tonight, especially if this is the first of our meetups that you have attended. We also have, as well as people in the room, we also have an online audience. We're streaming this live, and the meetup itself will be made available, the recording will be made available via our community at a later date. We don't have any fire drills planned for this evening, but if an alarm sounds, please exit via the nearest fire exit, which in this case is the front door. So, just a bit of an introduction to the event. This is run as part of the Data Lab community. So our community now has over 8,000 members across 100 countries since it was launched in September 2021. And that audience is made up of a range of professionals, students, and enthusiasts. We tend to see a real variety and mix of people that attend these events. The way that we run our community is on a theme basis, so we run monthly themes. So as well as having that kind of sector agnostic thread of data and AI throughout everything we do, each month in our community we tend to focus in and drill down a bit into specific sectors. Also, as well as our events, we run webinars online, so we have geographical reach for all of our members. We've got discussion groups and forums. We run a mentorship scheme, and it's a place where you can find like-minded peers, ask questions and gain support. And the most important thing is that it's free to join. So if you're not already a member and you'd like to be kept up to date with similar events and some of our other activities and meet some like-minded people, then please do join our community. Also, just like to thank our Data Lab partners and our funders who help to support Scotland's data community. So the Data Lab Innovation Centre is one of 4 innovation centres funded by the Scottish Funding Council. But in addition to that, we work very closely and have additional funding from Scottish Government for specific projects. But we also work with a number of partners across the public, private and third sectors. And without their support, a lot of this activity would not be possible. So a huge thank you to them. And then just before we get started, a reminder to tag us on LinkedIn. If you've got any comments to make, we'll certainly be posting throughout and after the event. So that's me kind of going through all the logistics. So just a brief introduction to the event tonight. So our theme for March is infrastructure, a very hot topic at the moment. Across government, industry and academia, data centres are increasingly framed as critical national infrastructure, economic catalysts and a backbone of AI and digital transformation. Whilst this is true, a lot of the conversation is often driven by hype, headlines and policy ambition, rather than a grounded understanding of how investment in data centres and wider infrastructure could benefit society and what this all means for people who are working in data. During tonight's panel session, we've got a range of experts from across the sector who between them will cover a broad spectrum. And through this discussion, we'll explore what data centres actually mean for data and AI professionals. We'll start with a kind of panel session led by myself, but then there will be opportunity for the audience to ask questions at the end. So if you have any thoughts or questions or comments on what's being discussed tonight, please hold on to those thoughts and you will have the opportunity at the end. We're going to discuss where the real value lies, what the trade-offs are, how infrastructure decisions at a national and strategic policy level shape analytics, governance, security and sustainability. And I'm sure we'll probably touch a lot more as we go through tonight's conversation. So just the format of the event, we've got over the next 45 minutes, we'll run the panel discussion with a 15-minute audience Q&A. And then for anyone that doesn't have to rush off, there's an opportunity for some more networking at the end of the event. And I'm sure our panellists will be happy to continue the conversation if you don't have a chance to ask your questions. The last meetup we had questions. I think we probably could have run an entire session just on audience Q&A. So please don't be afraid to ask us questions. So I'd just like to start by saying a thank you to our panellists for joining us tonight. And I'm just going to briefly introduce them before we get into our discussion. So immediately to my left, this is where I'm like, I don't know my left and right, why did I offer to do this? So immediately to my left, I've got Mark Wilson. Mark's the CEO of Illy Group, which has built a 4.1 gigawatt portfolio of energy storage projects. This makes it the UK's leading developer in that field. In 2025, Mark announced the Stoics, a 15 billion digital network of 3 green hyperscale data centres across Scotland's central belt. Mark brings the perspective of someone building at the intersection of renewable energy and large-scale digital infrastructure. Next to Mark, we've got Michael Hunter, who is Head of Commercial at Apatura, where he's been responsible for establishing a portfolio of 6 data centres with a combined 1.6 gigawatts of capacity, also in Scotland's central belt. Before that, Michael spent over 4 years at Google, working on data centre energy and location strategy across APAC and EMEA. He's seen this world from both the hyperscale and the developer side. And at the end, we have Richie Somerville, who is the Deputy Director of EPCC, the first national supercomputing centre in the UK. At EPCC, Richie oversees strategy and operations for one of the UK's foremost high-performance and research computing facilities. Richie brings over 30 years of experience across government, economic development and academia, with compute and data infrastructure running as a thread throughout. So a huge welcome to our panellists. And as I've said, we're just going to get straight into the questions because I want us to try and cover as much as possible. And so for me, what I'd really like to do is start the conversation by just setting the context a little bit and digging into a little bit more about what data centres actually mean for data professionals. As I mentioned previously, there's a lot of hype and misinformation around data centres right now. So I'm really keen to open the conversation by asking each of our panellists from their perspectives, how have they evolved over time, the data centres, not you individually, and what is the most important thing a data professional should actually understand about data centre infrastructure, but possibly don't. And I'm happy to open that to whoever would like to go first.
I'm happy to start.
Switch your microphone on.
Hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, evening everyone. We've been going 22 years now, 17 years as a green energy company. We've done a lot of wind and a lot of energy storage and moved into green data centres about 3 years ago. Due to the global demand and Scotland being seen as a prime location for green hyperscale data centres, probably very similar to why Michael is in the same place. The big key, number one key issue is, but an opportunity for Scotland, is power. And we have an abundance of renewable energy, mainly offshore. And it's first power. So if you're reading articles, you'll see the same message throughout the globe, is all the major tier 1 players need first power. And we're talking about end of 27, early 28 to get first power to these data centres. So I'm not a data centre expert by any means, and all the innards of it, that's not my skill set. But what we've been good at is getting power early before this energy storage projects or wind farms for renewables. So we've been able to take those skill sets and apply those to data centres. So the number one thing we see for these major infrastructure projects is power, and as far as we are concerned, green power.
I got that.
Cool.
Great evening all. Fantastic to be here. So completely agree with everything that Mark says, certainly in relation to the here and now, how important power is, renewable power is from a data centre strategy perspective, and particularly where that kind of intersects with Scotland. May be helpful for me to kind of step back a bit and to kind of rewind the clock. I've been in this sector for the last 15 years, and it's really worth noting that the sector really only has existed for 25, 30 years. I think Scotland and locations like that are certainly top of mind just now in terms of location decisions, but it's a relatively new thing. that Scotland is being considered, and it's new because the markets have predominantly centred around the large populations within Europe, so the FLAP-D markets, so Frankfurt, London, Paris, Dublin and Amsterdam. Forgive me, wrong order. And that's to say they've been driven because back in the early 2000s, banking, predominantly banking FSI companies were looking to outsource their services into specialist built facilities. Those facilities had to be close enough to the trading desks, so close enough from a speed perspective to get back, but far enough away that if there was a 9/11 type terrorist event, that the fundamentals wouldn't be impacted. You fast forward then to the 2010s, 2015, when the likes of Google, Microsoft, Amazon all started to introduce cloud services. Now, let's take ourselves back. There's probably a range of ages in the room, but it's really, really easy to take technology for granted and to take the ability to have cloud services at our fingertips to be able to scale up data platforms as and when we need it. But that's only now 15, 20 years old. So that's to say, in 2015, the cloud guys came in, they anchored on these facilities where financial services institutions were, and that's where they've grown, and that's where they've happily grown over 10 years. What's happened in the last 2, 3, 4 years is the size scale of these facilities has really dramatically increased. Power is a massive constraint, land's a massive constraint, M25 in those traditional locations just don't work anymore. And that's really where we now are at, with an increased bandwidth from hyperscalers, big technology companies, to deploy further away from the traditional locations and to start to be a bit more strategic around where it makes sense to deploy these facilities. I think you touched on kind of misinformation, and certainly there's a huge amount of misinformation in the market to do with these facilities. If there's one thing that you take away from tonight, I would say water really is not as scarce and is not a problem, certainly in Scotland, and it is not a problem from a consumption perspective with these new hyperscale facilities. One of our projects, 200 megawatts, about the same amount of power that's needed to power Edinburgh, will utilise about the same amount of water as the Commonwealth swimming pool in any given year. Very, very different from the narrative that the BBC and other media outlets are pushing forward.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'd just echo that. If I go back to the beginning of EPCC, we were operating out of the basement of JCMB with the very first large-scale computers, so Cray T3 ones. And then in the 90s, we moved to a data center out in Easterbush because that was the power and cooling requirements increased. I would echo. It's interesting from a data professional point of view. It used to be it would be really good to be able to go down the corridor and speak to the person who's actually spinning the tin because something wasn't quite working the way you wanted it to. And then when we got to the cloud era, and it became more of a service I consume rather than something where I understand all the workings of it, I think we got a slight dislocation. What I've seen over the last probably 4 or 5 years is a lot more interest in software, hardware, and hosting infrastructure as one thing, and how people understand how the three interact, particularly around sustainability. I can run the classic hype you hear about is things like ChatGPT. If you ask it a question, it uses up a cup of water. Well, it does if it's in Arizona, but it doesn't if it's in Cumnock. Because the atmosphere is different. But there's a real drive towards really re-understanding what is a cloud service, where is it based, what's it made up of, and as I develop my models or algorithms or whatever someone's working on, how do I take cost out of that. So that can be as simple as running the clock cycles on a computer slightly slower, so you're doing your calculations slightly slower. Or it can be much more complex in terms of when you run by scheduling, etc. So I think that for me is that I think we got stupid for a while, and we're now starting to become a little bit more intelligent in terms of what we're wanting to understand as users.
Okay, great. And so, Michael, from a commercial perspective, when organisations are making decisions about their data centres, whether that be about building them, buying capacity, choosing cloud providers, in your view, what are the often overlooked downstream effects or indirect consequences that impact the data teams who depend on those decisions that are being made often at a much more senior level?
Yeah, so I think fundamentally the question comes back to this kind of evolution of data centers, evolution of technology almost, to say, 20 years ago there might have been a kind of build versus lease scenario that you'd have to run. Indeed, banks were having to do that, and banks were probably the only people that were having to do that. Technology's obviously massively shifted on since then, and it's been able to do that because there is now a very developed supply chain right through that stack, coming from the likes of Mark and myself, who are here to ensure that we're enabling the development of data centers. We're securing land, we're securing power, we're ensuring that there's planning in place. You then have a very developed layer of data center operators, the likes of Digital Realty, Equinix, Pulsant from a Scottish perspective, Data Vita. And then on top of that, you have the likes of the hyperscalers, and then obviously SaaS providers after that. So because of that full stack that's available, that really has come into play over the last 15 years, decisions can then be made by organizations who can be turning things up, turning things down in a very, very quick manner, versus where obviously we've come from 10, 15 years ago.
Richie, from a research academic perspective, what would your thoughts be?
I think the change has been just the sheer cost of some of the infrastructure. We're, as was widely covered, we're in the process of working with the UK government to buy the next national supercomputer, up to 750 million. That's a lot of public money you've got to look after and make sure you're getting the right asset from. So what you see is a lot more thought around utility of that service and forward planning. So power would be a good example. So for the next national supercomputer, we need somewhere in the region of about 30 megawatts of power. We had to make a decision almost 9 years ago to put in a bid to get a connection run out to the advanced computing facility, Easterbush, just to be in the right place in the queue. We were very fortunate that COVID happened, which meant that we actually got to dig up the road next to IKEA without many people noticing, because everyone was at home. But it's taken us, when was that, 2020, we fully energized the secondary transformers only this year. So people forget there's an awful lot of, there's a big tail to lead to that moment of, oh, I can do something now. So for me, there's that bit. I think the government's making some good decisions now about having a forward plan, having a roadmap. It's giving a little bit more certainty, but it's also leading to some challenges around supply and demand. So we're lucky, we work in quite a constraint. We run a data center that doesn't have to be up all the time, because we're interested in the science of the data center as much as the science done in it. But for these guys developing sites, for some you're allowed to be down 26 minutes a year. And there's not many things run where they're only allowed to not work 26 minutes a year. So that requires a lot of thinking, a lot of planning. And if we're increasingly trying to go down a renewable route, even with battery storage,
moving at all.
Good question. Well, I'm just back from a meeting at Edinburgh University, is that one? Yeah. And what we were very much pushing was, let's get the workforce ready. This is going to happen. We're certainly going to make sure it's going to happen. I've no doubt Michael will be doing the same with his projects. And if we don't run as fast as we can as developers, people will go elsewhere, and Scotland will miss the opportunity. We watched that with onshore wind and the renewable journey from 2009 to sort of 2009 onwards. There was a huge opportunity for companies to be building turbines and the blades and all the components in Scotland, and we missed that trick, and we shouldn't have. And a lot of other countries capitalised on that. What we see is we need to get our projects, and I'm sure Michael feels exactly the same, as ready as quickly as humanly possible. Bringing in the correct partners that are going to build the right type of data centre. We create a huge envelope. All our sites are 100 acres plus. So we're able to create an envelope, but also put conditions on our planning so that certain things are met, i.e. you're not going to come in and put a diesel generator on our site. You're not going to come in and put a gas plant on our site. That's not happening on my watch. These are going to be, if not 100% renewable, as close to that as possible. So we are able to control all that aspect. And for example, we did a big infrastructure project up at Loch Ness, which was 500 megawatts. That took us 7 years, a big pump storage project. And we were able to put so many conditions in it. And we sold that to Statkraft, a fantastic company. But it just meant that we knew that we were not walking away. We will never walk away. We want to see the ribbon cut in 2030 and be there. But all the things we've put in place will happen. And that's a great position to be in at the beginning where we're at, is we can, it's like mold a project to something that doesn't have to be the norm, a cookie cutter approach like has happened maybe in other countries around the world. We can do things that are unique and special so that people will look at our projects or Michael's projects and say, right, that's different, that's great, that's new, that's green. It's not greenwashing, because there's a lot of that crap going about. It's real. Let's see if we can duplicate that in America or in India or Africa or wherever it may be, and that's a nice goal to have. So yeah, the workforce downstream is, we're saying, well, this is going to happen. As far as we're concerned, this is going to happen in Scotland. If you're at university or not, or whatever stage is, look at maybe an area within that. Mike will be able to answer that a lot better than me. These jobs are going to become available. Between us, we're doing 3 gigawatts, just over 3 gigawatts. That's a huge amount of energy. The numbers we're getting, we did a bigger report. It's not huge employment. Your numbers might differ, but we're looking at per campus. Each of our projects will have 6 buildings on it. Per campus, it'll be a workforce of about between 150 to 200 people. Full time, you might have different numbers, I don't know. So we're looking at about 500 people as full time on these projects, which might not sound a lot, but to build them, we're talking thousands. So there's a lot of very positive things from this.
Michael, so your experience of how the AI Opportunities Action Plan's been out. Yeah, of course you can, yeah.
Just add to that. So yeah, again, I agree a lot with what Mark's saying there, just to build as well. So I think you were talking about the AI Action Plan, right? And actually, AI Action Plan, off the back of that, the government called for AI growth zones. So you might have seen Lanarkshire's Scotland's growth zone. It was awarded that 2 or 3 weeks ago. it's through that I met you. It's through that I met you. And to give you some context as to kind of some of the benefits and the jobs and the investment that we're talking about. So our nominated site is actually in Lanarkshire. It's the old Ravenscraig steel strip mill site. So used to be a massive employer in Lanarkshire. It was shut down in 1993 and has laid vacant since then. We're proposing a 550 megawatt data center facility on there. So, I mean, the numbers start to get a bit scary, or in a very positive way. We're talking £3.9 billion capital investment that would then spin out £730 million of GVA every year that facility is operational. Like, that's the equivalent to 0.4% of Scotland's GDP. So there's massive employment opportunities that spin it out of the investment itself. It's about 440 people employed directly on site, which again might not sound like a massive number, but with average salaries of like £59,000, well above Scotland's national average. And it really then starts to create a bit of a snowball in terms of exhaust fumes through to academia, through to places, you know, like Data Lab, to help ensure that we have the right people that are trained to build the facilities, operate the facilities, and to benefit off the back of the compute stack that they will run.
Great, thank you. Richie, it would be good to hear your view on that, but also probably for the people in the room, it would probably be helpful to just talk a little bit about what the impact of actually having this supercomputer in the UK. What is the potential of us having this?
So let's talk about virtuous circle. It's probably the best way of thinking of it. So if we look at global events, which got even more mad in the last fortnight, what we've started to, I think that helps us understand this construct of sovereign resources. The idea that I have certain assets available for use locally. If we take Britain as local, quite a lot of, certainly cloud services, if you're using them in the UK, you're not actually processing on a UK computer. It'll be in Iceland, could be somewhere in main continental Europe, or it'll be in Dublin, which is not, that's relatively benign. Or it'll be in America. Increasingly with AI, it's linked in some way back to America. Infrastructure is becoming a commodity of differentiation globally in a way that it probably hasn't for about 50 years, in terms of it being a real lever of the perception of power. So how does that help? How does that work in a Scottish context? So EPCC supports people to learn how to do supercomputing right across the UK, but we also have a master's program, PhD program, and we work with companies of all sizes to help them, largely with software problems they've got. How do I use a particular algorithm, or how do I develop a particular AI model, because I can't quite get it to perform the way I wanted it to. The benefit that we then deliver to the next stage of this virtuous circle is you've got people with the right skills, hopefully. You've got companies that are starting to optimize tools that one hopes are starting to drive more custom from that allows them to grow. As they grow, they're going to want to consume services. I think increasingly, because of certain political decisions, but also just social norms that we have in the UK, they want to do that against good sustainability criteria, but they also want to make sure they're turning a profit. They want to be able to look at a price point that's going to matter. That then comes to some of the stuff that these guys do, which is if you can deliver the infrastructure here so that cost of usage is lower, then you're driving more business. And it just becomes, it's not quite a circle, it's probably more a spiral. From an EPCC point of view, our driver is to try and support that ecosystem as best we can. So at one edge, we've got national supercomputing services. So Archer 2, which is the current system, can do 19 million billion calculations a second. So it's used for large-scale modeling and simulation. So you want to do weather modeling or very precise modeling of engineering or medical performance. That then trickles down into real performance, because some of that is done by engineering firms who are then turning that into new engines or ways of understanding how the weather's, or where a wind turbine goes relative to its neighbours, so that it's getting the maximum benefit and not being disrupted by the aftertow from the one next to it. But at the other end, we've got really simple stuff like, I've got code written for a CPU system that I now need to convert for GPU, so which probably means you're going to have to recode it in CUDA. How do I do that? I just need a little bit of help. A bit like for lay people, I've got a tax problem. Which accountant should I speak to? So we do a lot of that type of work, of just helping people at a particular point on their journey. So I see those cycles where just feeding in those opportunities, from Rolls-Royce doing big engines down to small startups based in the Bay Centre starting to develop products that they want to take to market, where they want to do that in an environment that's not necessarily AWS straight away, but they're just testing it. That's what we're trying to do, and I think that bit of you just feeding different parts of the ecosystem. We're incredibly lucky in Scotland. We have all the right skills, but not necessarily all in the right place. But we can normally, within 3 or 4 phone calls, find someone who knows someone who knows someone. So that's a huge benefit, and I've certainly seen, working at a more UK level, it surprised me how lucky we are here relative to the rest of the UK in that regard.
Thank you. You touched upon the sovereignty issue. So there's clearly growing debate about this. Again, that's heightened in the last few weeks. And there's that question over whether the UK can or should rely on the US hyperscalers for critical digital infrastructure. Do we think that's a real risk, or is it overstated?
As a risk, I don't think it's overstated, but that doesn't mean it's an issue. If you look to mainland Europe, I don't know if many of you are aware of a number of the changes recently in France. French government has retrenched away from using Google, Microsoft, Amazon, to using more proprietary services based in France, a lot more open source. That said, France has a history of delivering open source software solutions. So you are starting to see in Europe a very clear differentiation in terms of wanting to do something that doesn't involve those big hyperscalers. I think it would be remiss of anyone not to have it on their risk register if they run such a thing, what happens if, and to have a backup plan. Because we are living in a time where the unthinkable becomes believable overnight in a slightly scary way. That said, the corporations also don't want to lose income. So I don't think that the influence that certain people believe is happening to certain of the US big hyperscalers is quite as extreme as we would worry about. But I think you definitely have to think about it and think about the plans you're going to have in case.
Do you want to comment on that?
Sorry, maybe being too positive. I think you're absolutely right in terms of it being a risk. I think there was something that I saw the other day that was saying, I think if Trump decided to pull his kill switch and to really weaponize data, to weaponize the American influence that we have, the hyperscalers grasp, it's something like 88% of UK companies would go dark, which is, it was terrifying, I think, to read that 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, and even more terrifying, obviously, given what's happened in the interim time period. So it is a risk. There probably should be contingency plans, and I think France, obviously, potential to take some lessons from what's happening over there.
Mark, anything to add to that?
No, just agree from the point of view of always have a plan B, have a contingency plan. I mean, we're number one foremost a green renewable energy company, and our number one goal is to get the country to net zero and to have 100% energy security so that we don't have to rely on anyone, because at the moment we do. Subsea cables, we're taking energy into the UK, and energy prices fluctuate due to that. If we have enough renewables on the system, along with enough energy storage, we can wean ourselves off coal, and we can eventually wean ourselves off gas, and we can be 100% energy secure, and that's so feasible. It's not difficult. So on the same point as a contingency, logically, we should then be doing similar with our data and having that sovereignty within that. And we've got the power here that nobody can switch us off soon. And that puts us in a very, Scotland, but as the UK as a whole, in a very, excuse the pun, but powerful position going forward. And that's what we believe very much so is we see where there's a lot of too much negativity on data centres. Michael mentioned water's one, which I think is just nonsense for Scotland. But there's not enough positivity about the amount of jobs that we're going to create, the amount of investment, and it's just the sheer billions that's going to be injected into the country. It's going to be phenomenal for us all. It's going to be a complete. It's like there was the industrial revolution, the renewable revolution, which is still going on. There'll be the data center revolution, and that gives us the opportunity where if we play our cards right, the renewable guys, some of the guys sitting up at the back there, we can build tons more wind, especially offshore, along with loads more solar down south, along with loads more energy storage, give ourselves complete energy security, easy, not difficult. Then have demand in Scotland where we need demand because there's over 1 billion, I think, lost in curtailment, which is having to switch wind turbines off and pay the developers to do it, which is madness. So you take away that curtailment because we've got the energy storage to do it, but also we've got the demand of the data centres to take all that extra energy. Then we're in a my belief, and not just mine, is we're then in a very fortunate position where we can do even more renewables. When we've got all the data centres built and we've got ourselves energy security, do even more renewables, create supply and demand, it's economics, more supply. And then what does that do for us? That means that we could then become a global exporter of renewables, 100% renewables, using the existing subsea cables that we've got into Europe and beyond. So we can become a global powerhouse for a global exporter of renewables, but also a global hub for green hyperscale data centres. I think the juncture we're at the moment is just mind-blowing. I love it. It seriously blows my mind. I don't see one negative thing about it. I mean, we work so closely with the communities and we're saying, like, what do you need? How can we help you? Because there's enough here that everybody can win from this. And we do that, as I said earlier, we really, really do listen as a company. And I'm sure Michael is exactly the same. And it's just a win-win-win-win situation for everyone. So, I mean, as I'm sure you can hear from my voice, I'm just super excited about everything that's going on at the moment. And I think Scotland is right at this moment at a point where if we move quick enough, Scotland is a big stamp on the global map. And this is the time that it can happen.
So we've spoken about moving back into kind of from a data professional perspective. You've touched on the kind of renewable side of things. You've talked about the opportunity, the evolution. You've mentioned greenwashing really briefly. From a data professional perspective, where does the responsibility sit within organisations? So for data professionals whose organisations have sustainability KPIs, for example, what levers do they have when it comes to the carbon footprint of their data infrastructure? And are there risks of organisational greenwashing? I think there's two sides to this story.
I'd like to listen to Michael first, if that's okay, because he's a lot more of an expert than I am.
I was going to pass it to Richie. So I think, I mean, certainly I think from our perspective, we're obviously on the infrastructure side, right? And there's probably people in the room that could answer this question much better than certainly I could from an actual end user perspective. But I think it comes back to my opening comments around where this sector has come from, where the infrastructure has come from, and it now needs to, we're now at this absolute juncture. I agree with what Mark's saying in terms of we now need to be strategic. We all utilise these facilities in terms of everything that we do, both from a personal perspective, from a professional perspective, from an academic perspective, government perspective. These facilities are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and we need to put them where it makes sense from a sustainability perspective. Certainly, Scotland has got a massive problem in that they are producing too much renewable power. They can't get it down south. Great problem to have. We've touched on the geopolitical side of things, where this infrastructure, where data is going to be weaponized. It's so important. It's so important that we can control that. From a UK perspective, from a Scottish perspective, and aligning that big demand centres close to where that excess supply of renewables really does make sense, certainly from my perspective. Just to add some context to that, so one of our facilities here in Scotland would be 43%, or would reduce the carbon impact by 43% compared to being down south in England. So it's not to say, or certainly I don't think that data professionals can have such a big impact from a sustainability perspective at that sort of user level. It is taking it right back to the fundamentals of where that infrastructure is being located, and that's the opportunity that we have to really then turn the dial.
Richie?
So, how many people here have actually been in a data centre? Okay, a few. Were there lots of fans and air being blown around in those data centres? Yeah, so chill-aisled data centres, standard kit, a box, the thing you imagine, probably about 80 kilowatts, not that power intensive. The next evolution of national supercomputer, each individual rack is going to be 450 kilowatts. And the next evolution beyond that, you're into gigawatt per rack. That is just ridiculous. So what you've got to do is think about, how do I host that in a way that the amount of energy used to keep it cool, because heat is the principal product of compute, is as efficient as possible. So if I was a data professional or was running a data company and I wanted to be green, or have one of those metrics, a KPI that might help, I would be asking whoever I'm getting my IT done it remotely from, what's the PUE of your system? So that's the power utility efficiency. So for every kilowatt of power that goes in, how much extra power is needed to allow the system to run? So that's all the infrastructure around it. For the next national service, ours is going to be at 1.03, which is pretty much world leading, because we're doing direct liquid cooling. Because we're in Scotland, we very seldom go above a temperature where any form of forced chilling is required. We can do natural cooling using adiabatic coolers on the roof, which is basically like the back of your, like running water down through cardboard. But we also get REGO certified power. So the types of services these guys are trying to develop, they're doing it with renewables on site, or with certified connections to certain renewables. Where that's not possible, you can do a thing where your power company that supplies you will give you certificates to verify as far as the UK government's concerned, that the power you're consuming has come from wind, hydro, solar. So we do that. You pay a slight premium, but we feel it's the right thing to do, and we've done that for the last 20 years in terms of the power that we've been consuming. So there's these little things you can ask that put people on point, and they're built to ISO standards. They would not be unusual for most data center operators to have to give you an answer to. So if you were looking for something just to start the conversation, I'm not saying it's going to solve everything, but start the conversation, I would be asking those two things. Do you have RIGO certification for your power, and what's your PUE? Yeah.
Thank you. I'm keen to move on to our audience questions. Hopefully you've got some, but before I do, there's one final question that I'd like to ask, but I'm going to ask our panellists to be brief in their answers. I think it's an important question to ask, and I think it'll be good to open up the conversation. So for someone in this room who is responsible for building data pipelines, training machine learning models, running analytics workloads, what should they be asking about their infrastructure or cloud teams that they're not already asking? To building on what you've just said, Richie.
That's really tricky because it depends on the industry and it depends on the company's social position, I suppose. I've given you two things I think would be interesting for you, particularly if you're coming at it from a sustainability angle. If you are interested in sovereign, then it's where is that cloud actually operated from? And there are different tiers. There's also stuff around how reliable do we actually need our IT to be? From a research perspective, our system can go down, and we could have what they call a brownout, where there's a fluctuation on the grid, and our systems will protect themselves. We just reload the science and run it again, and the researcher will get their question a day later, but to be honest, they're quite happy because they're working at a certain scale. If you're into micro trading, that's obviously fundamentally different. You need millisecond. Where are you in that continuum, and what level of tier of IT support do you actually want to operate at? Because that could be part of your cost model. It can also mean that you're just getting a more efficient use. And do you need to do it in the cloud? It's unbelievable how much compute is now in a modern phone. So we think about these things. A lot of it you can do with, and Britain's got a real legacy in doing this, doing really interesting things with very small amounts of compute compared to big compute. It's something I think we need to think more about.
I think or probably summing up what you said just in a couple of words. So I think sustainability, very important. I think the uptime point that you made is really, really important. And I obviously can't remember the third point that I was going to make. But I think certainly that's from the data professional side of things. I think just as kind of citizens of, I'm guessing probably Scotland, it's back to this opportunity that certainly Mark and myself are very passionate about being strategic around where these facilities are located to benefit us all.
If I was just looking at it from not as a developer, yep, I would probably not know to ask that question, because it's almost like we're not that far ahead on the journey yet. But we are, if it makes sense. It's like we're committed to developing green data centers, and I keep emphasizing green because yes, there's ones in the Nordics and places like that work off big hydro pump storage and stuff like that. But correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, but I can't imagine there's that many globally that are running 100% or close to 100% of green energy. I wouldn't imagine. So this is where the change is happening, and this is why Scotland's well positioned globally to then, in a number of years' time, that question, or if not that long, in 3-5 years' time, that question will start to be asked a lot more because it's available. It's like what Richie said there about power purchase agreements. You might, for your household, say I only want to work off green energy, so you'll talk to Ecotricity or green energy or one. There's loads of them now that say we only will give you green energy, but you're still getting your energy from the grid, which is a combination of everything, not coal but gas and other things. Mostly renewables now in Scotland, but because you've got those power purchase agreements, that locks in that they're able to say with confidence, because that's how it's structured, is that you're getting green energy because you're paying for those credits, so to speak. And that's a similar sort of move that's getting made in the data center world. But what's fantastic is that we're also on this path, CP30 path, which is going at an absolute breakneck speed to get us all, the whole grid system, to net zero by 2030. If it doesn't hit that, it shouldn't be that far off it. So our whole grid system, with the UK, is their goal is to be green by 2030. So. To me, it's as I say, if it was just a guy in the street, I wouldn't know to ask that question. That's to be completely honest with you.
Do we have any questions in the room? Okay, if you can just wait till I bring a microphone to you. If you can maybe just before you ask your question, just introduce yourself with your name and where you're from.
Hello, I'm Ian Payton. I'm a chartered town planner, data professional, and I'm also working for Scottish Power at the moment, so I've got a number of interests. But there was a recent refusal for planning permission for a hyperscale green data centre on the outskirts of Edinburgh, and I don't know the details of the application, but do you think there's a gap between the data centre profession, the planning profession, and getting the right decisions, the right type of development, the right pace, and maybe asking some of the sort of questions that Rishi was suggesting? And then how do you bridge that gap if there is such a gap?
I was surprised to see that rejected. I don't know the absolute reason. I haven't properly dug deep enough to see the reasons behind it. But for us, my obvious, just common sense answer would be it was in the wrong location. I mean, we've looked at 50, 60, 70 sites in Scotland, and we whittled those down to actually 8 as well. And then we whittled those down to a further 3, so that it's like anything you're building. For wind, there was 67 boxes of gap analysis that we had to tick to make sure a wind site was ready to go. For pumped storage, there was over 300. For data centres, I'm not sure exactly what the box is, but there's a lot. It's not just as simple as planning, grid and land rights. There's numerous other things you've got to take into consideration, flight paths, things like that. And it might have been on the Edinburgh flight path, and that might have been the reason. Who knows? It's not difficult to go. You could look at the objection; it'll tell you. But from my point of view, is because we've gone into different sectors, it's always been about location. Like in anything, we've been in residential as well. That's how we started, and it was all down to location. So. My answer is you can look into it and it'll give you the exact answer, but my gut would tell me wrong location.
I think just adding a bit more to that as well, I think your question was about whether there is a gap, and I think there absolutely is. I think there's a gap between policy, and I think there's a gap between the definition of, certainly from a Scottish perspective, they're talking about green data centres. Nobody can actually stand behind and say, what is a green data centre? I've got an opinion about what a green data centre is, and certainly coming at it from a strategic perspective, again, let's put them in Scotland, let's put them where there is excess renewable. Let's think about from a build perspective, so that's energy in. Then we think about from a build perspective, you know, the sort of standards that we need to be complying with from a BREEAM perspective and all of that side of things. And then on the exhaust side, then thinking about, you touched on the heat that these facilities produce, be thinking about district heating on the way out. Again, I think there just needs to be a recognition that we are all utilising these facilities on a daily basis. We need to then be strategic about where we put them And I think there is currently a gap between how policy is shaping that, certainly from a planning perspective. We've been very, very proactive from an Aperture perspective of engaging local councils, of trying to educate planners around what these facilities are, the benefits of them. And I think that that will come, but yes, I think there is a gap just now.
So I think there's also the classic, and I can say this as an ex-town planner, there's a classic UK problem in that you've got two forms of town planning. You've got town planning legislation in England, you've got town planning in England, Wales, and then town planning legislation in Scotland. So in England, as part of the AI Opportunity Action Plan, AI growth zones, there was a government commitment to effectively create a sort of simplified planning zone type arrangement. So they were going to lift certain decisions up to be national decisions. So it'd be a bit like the NPF4 in Scotland, where you then have to translate that to Holyrood. So from a top-down perspective of going, these are important at a national scale, therefore we are going to identify some strategic sites. That's what the AI growth zone model was supposed to be providing developers with, was some certainty around that. And the reality's been not quite there. That particular development, if it's the one I'm thinking of, it's in the middle of the Greenbelt, and I know the Greenbelt has slowly been moving further and further west in Edinburgh. But I think fundamentally at this point, it was just a step too far. I think if the housing development that would happen between it and the RBS headquarters goes ahead, then another 5 or 6 years, you might be in a situation where if you're trying to do district heating, it could be a complementary development, but I think it was just timing more than anything else, timing and location.
Thanks. Martin Bartosana, independent consultant now. I wanted to throw out something which each of you might be kind of interested in answering. In terms of Ritchie, I suppose there's been a bit of discussion about kind of processing sovereignty and so forth, and I'm remembering back to, I think as an undergraduate, EPCC being opened. So yeah, aging myself. Where do you think things are at if we go to a different level of the stack and we're talking about fabs and silicon production? Because obviously we're dependent still on silicon coming in for that, and there's all sorts of really interesting silicon which could go into these future places which are being built. And then maybe in terms of things for you guys to think about, I'm curious about how many data centers you think there is capacity for, by which I mean, obviously the demand may be uncapped, but I'm wondering about the curtailment and kind of the energy requirements and the matching between energy production as well as build. And the final thing I was going to say has kind of been almost touched on. I was going to invite gently some commentary on where things are at in terms of political understanding, because there's clearly been mentioned about at a national level politicians with AI having a kind of vision for the need for infrastructure and the big geopolitical issues around there. But having sat on a planning committee as a member of the planning committee for my sins, amongst other random things I've done, I'm conscious of the fact that there can be a big gap in understanding, let's simply say, and also there can be a lot of confusion, even the kind of best will in the world, carbon analysis which isn't well done kind of stuff, and where you guys feel things are at in terms of political understanding for this particular field. Thanks.
Thank you.
Fab and silicon first. Probably one of the least understood industries that the UK used to be world leading at. We have some brilliant companies in Fife, in a Scottish context. In the UK, you go down to Newport, South Wales, still a lot of fabrication going on. But I'll give the apocryphal story for me is a company called Graphcore. So Graphcore an academic spin out in Bristol. They produced what was called an IPU, an intelligent processing unit, so it's like a form of GPU. And they got to the point of actually having a production machine. We bought one of their very early systems because our interest is really in the software. How do you get that technology to then perform appropriately? If we'd been in France, the government would have built a very large-scale deployment of Graphcore. as part of how it invests in France has a very different model because it basically owns Renault and all these other things. I think there's still an opportunity, and if you actually look at the AI Opportunity Action, and particularly the compute roadmap that came out, government has made a real commitment to trying to understand how to create some form of silicon certainty for startups. So we have a lot of silicon startups in the UK, or existing companies, but they're quite small. But the biggest, they have the classic growth thing. You've got the valley of despair that you've got to get across. That normally means someone else has got to pay for it and not expect to get their money back. And government are starting to take those sorts of bets, where certainly in the conversations we're having as the National Supercomputing Centre, where we are saying, if some of those companies get a machine to production version 1, we will quite happily host it for them and open it up to the research community to start playing with it. Because that's how you start getting software stacks. Once you get a software stack, you can then start to go out to commercial users and you can say, this is what you can do. We can verify and validate that. So I think there is, and it's not just us. Durham does a huge amount of this, Durham University, UCL, similarly, really interested in what we would call novel compute. So I think there's a real opportunity. I'll then touch on the political bit. On the political bit, I have met more politicians in the last 3 years in this role than I did when I worked in government, which was quite interesting, because they are genuinely interested, and that's at all tiers. That's from local councillors right through to ministers and a few prime ministers. Unfortunately, I've been doing this long enough that we've had a few prime ministers. I think there is still a need at this point in a Scottish context of developing this out. There is a learning gap about what is a data centre, what does it mean? Because in reality, its environmental footprint is probably better than a lot of the factories that were on the sites that it's then replacing, that went bust or. So I think there is a bit of just learning, and we have a very open door policy. We will allow people to come and see our data centre, and in small groups, no more than 8, because of logistics, because we're keen that people understand what they are.
I'll try and tackle your second point in terms of the kind of size of the opportunity or the potential of the opportunity. I'll try and not baffle you with numbers to start with, and then we'll maybe move on to a bit of an anecdote as well. So, last year, so there was, I think, curtailment of £1.5 billion. So, as Mark touched on, so that's payments to wind developers to essentially turn off the generation because we can't flow that down to where it's needed. That is set to rise to $3 billion by 2030. So we have a massive oversupply of energy. In Scotland just now, there's probably about 50, 60 megawatts of data centre capacity that's there. In the UK, there's 1.6 gigawatts. That's set to rise to about 4 or 5 gigawatts is kind of the estimation. So just from standing back, very, very simple, we're going to need an additional, 2.5, 3 gigawatts. There's far too much power being produced in Scotland already. It makes sense to be strategically putting that. I think there's real nervousness, and quite rightly so, nervousness, that we're going to attract all this demand from a data center perspective, and suddenly, we're going to be in this situation where the lights don't go on when you're at home. People get really, really nervous, right? I just think it's completely unfounded. One, I think Rich even spoke, getting 30 megawatts takes 9 years. That's because there's so much scrutiny from an electricity perspective, right the way down from Ofgem, NESO, then into the local DNO. So, and it's on their heads, licensed operators, there's no way they're going to be giving out electricity if it impacts anybody else. From an anecdotal perspective, I spent 6 years living in Singapore. So similar concept to Scotland, 5 million people, it's an island. Singapore really doesn't have natural resources, but it managed to attract one of the biggest, certainly at the time, data center markets in the whole of Asia. They rode that wave for 20 odd years. They had the investment coming in. They attracted all the big technology companies, and they benefited off the exhausts of everything that the data centers brought. The government then got really, really nervous at one point, and they decided that actually these facilities were going to be using too much power as a percentage of the overall of Singapore, and they put in a moratorium. So it's not to say, from a Scottish perspective, we have not attracted any large-scale investment. We have to. There's a massive opportunity that we do. Everyone, I think, prematurely then gets really worried about the end state of where we're going to be really, tight on electricity, and there's not going to be enough for everything else. I think there's mechanisms throughout that journey that will mean, both from a regulatory perspective all the way through to a government perspective, that they can turn off that tap if they needed. But we're so far away from that being a fundamental problem. My big worry is we are in a race from a UK perspective, from a European perspective, to attract this investment. And if we don't move quick enough, if we get too worried before we're even at the starting line, that's my biggest concern.
From the political, or from the sort of feedback we're getting is volume-wise for the UK, they're sort of targeting between 5 and 10 gigawatts of hyperscale data centres is the figures that we've seen, which with what's in the system is so doable. I think there's 120 gigawatts or something like that. I don't know if you think it's something like that. It's enormous. That's for the whole of the UK. And obviously a lot of those will not go ahead. We're not concerned about the power from the discussion, what I discussed earlier. And as I say, we just see this as a major opportunity for the country. From a political point of view, we've found the councils really, really positive. But again, it's as Michael said and Richie is, there's a learning curve with anything. We've seen the learning curve with wind, with batteries, with pump storage. Pump storage wasn't done for 40 years, so it was a big thing to relook at, and you could understand, respect the planners that would take time to get used to. But I think we've found with the councils that they recognise the benefits for them. It's almost like we're seeing it as we can't afford to miss out on this. This is tens of millions of business rates per annum. It's going to create thousands of jobs. It's going to have millions of pounds of benefits to the local community. And we're finding that rather than any doors pushing against us, that they're pushing the opposite way. And we're having very frequent conversations and meetings with them directly. That's at the local level. Talking to all the councillors, a lot of them have been to our local community meetings. Super great support. You're always going to get local people that aren't always, it's just, some people don't want change, and that you've got to respect that. But from a council level, we've seen super support because it's logic, it makes common sense. It's how we have to evolve and adapt with it. And then at a higher level, at ministerial level, support's been fabulous. I mean, I see it as if you've got the right site in the right location and you're doing the right things, i.e. green, you'll get your site, the site will go through planning in Scotland. And if you can get an early grid connection, the site will get built and there will be a developer or operator, should I say, ready to get in there and start building it out and making it happen. And this is what's happening as we speak. And this is, a lot of this will happen this year. It's like that. So I say maybe I'm sounding too positive tonight because that's how it's coming out in my head, but I'm being completely honest with you, and that's the only way I can be. It's just such an opportunity for the country.
Thank you, everyone. Sadly, we are out of time for any more questions right now, but as I said, our experts will be around. If you have any other questions you'd like to come and ask them at the end, they'd be more than happy to speak to you. I think there are so many questions about this topic, and I hope you'll agree that the panel have done a really good job of tackling what can often be quite challenging and controversial questions that have a range of perspectives, and they're complex questions. There's not straight answers to very many of these. I think I would certainly want to think twice about putting myself on a panel on a topic where there is so much uncertainty and controversy. But I think it's really important. I think from our perspective at Data Lab, we're really keen to be able to promote the kind of balanced conversation. We're very aware of the misinformation and the hype, and we're very keen to ensure that people understand the opportunity that some of that misinformation is dispelled, and actually just to create a platform for these types of conversations to happen. So we're going to draw this to close. I would just like to thank all of our speakers for joining us tonight. It's been really great to have the opportunity to have you with us. Thank you to all of you for joining us both in person, and to those of you who've been joining us from the comfort of wherever you are tonight online. We offer an open mic, as this is our community. We give people the opportunity, if there's anyone in the room tonight that wants 30 seconds to promote an event or something that's coming up. We've got one here. Really keen to kind of use this as a networking opportunity as well. Just 30 seconds, I'll keep it brief.
Hi. 3 weeks today, in this very room on the 31st of March, we have some undergraduate statisticians of Edinburgh University doing talks about what they've been studying their final year. It's an event being run by the Royal Statistical Society Edinburgh Group. Last year, we had someone talking about they'd looked into Formula One race strategy, and they dropped the bombshell at the end. They'd just been hired by Williams. So it could be a fascinating evening. 3 weeks today, 31st of March. It'll be on the Data Lab events calendar in the next day or two. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. We have, if Stephen wants to change the slides, just to let you know of some of our upcoming events. So as I said, March is our infrastructure. We've got an event taking place at the end of the month, focused on health and social care services. And then as we move into April, the theme will move on to open data, with a range of events scheduled to take place both in person and online. We also have our international annual conference coming up in May. It's getting close very quickly. So DataFest will take place at the Assembly Rooms, 27th and 28th of May. Tickets are available on our website now. And DataFest kind of covers, there will definitely be an infrastructure thread at DataFest, but it covers all things data and AI over the course of the 2 days. Opportunity to come together for networking and to hear from some international experts, as well as learn more about what's happening in Scotland. Really keen to get feedback on this event and all of our events, so you can scan the QR code, let us know what you thought of the event tonight. We're always looking for opportunities to improve, and it helps us to plan for future events. Otherwise, that's all from me. I just want to say thanks again for coming, and we hope to see you again at future events. Thank you.